Good afternoon and welcome to our symposium today. I know things are quite different to where we're expecting, but we're doing a coffee house chat looking at creating the business case through linking road safety and the environment. Joining me today, we have Lee. Welcome, Lee.
Hi, Jerome.
So Lee's in a coffee house over in Adelaide, and we have Guy. Welcome, Guy.
Hey, Jerome and Lee.
Hi, Guy.
Whereabouts is your coffee house, mate?
Oh, my coffee house is up there in the hills in Mount Evelyn, out the back of Melbourne.
Awesome. So as you can see, we've adapted to this whole COVID-19 live for this symposium. So a bit different to what we're expecting. So we hope you enjoy today's session as we link this together and really illustrate how you have the systems-based thinking is linking together the environment and safety, and the two of them can work really powerfully together in unison. And as an example, if we go back and we think about where I guess the safe system came from, and we really need to understand as a society that we can demand freedom of mobility and we can demand safety at the same time. So that was by Professor Klaus Tingerval. So right back when the foundations of the safe systems are already touching on how we can bring the environment into it. And so what we're going to be doing today is by having Lee from Uniting Communities. Welcome, Lee. Would you like to tell us about your organisation?
Yeah, sure, Jerome. Yeah, we're a reasonably large not-for-profit community service organisation operating in South Australia. We've got roughly 1,500 staff and volunteers. We deliver about 100 different community services, so quite a diverse offering. Working alongside about 80,000 South Australians each year, right from youth through to aged. We run some flagship services like Lifeline Adelaide, and some goodwill op shops as well, some residential aged care facilities. And we're in about 130 company vehicles doing about 2 million kilometres a year. And we've got probably another 100 or so grey fleet vehicles doing another 1 million+ kilometres on top of that, delivering our services every year.
So what an amazing footprint that we have. And you're a not-for-profit, which is really powerful. The other thing is you're also the president of the Australasian Fleet Management Association, and you're actually just part of our steering committee of the NRSP. So it's fantastic to have you involved in that level as well.
Yes, thanks. Yeah, just joined the NRSPP, so that's great to be part of that. Yeah, and I've been associated with AFMA for quite a few years now, so I have a weird ongoing passion with fleet.
Awesome. And then seeing that as a bit of a brain burst idea that came through from this is joining us is Guy from Sustainability Victoria. And we've had many discussions around the powerful link of safety and the environment that sort of emerged throughout as we've gotten to know each other, Guy. So welcome.
Thanks, Jerome. Yes, yeah. Yeah, so Guy Pritchard, I manage a small team called the SV Lab in Sustainability Victoria. And we have a remit in Sustainability Victoria looking at how we can achieve the two pillars of our strategy, which are net zero carbon, and Victoria has a legislated target of net zero carbon by 2050, and the circular economy. So we look at the materials and waste side of things as well. And I think for me, it's an unusual partnership, road safety and environment, and it's one that's been really interesting to explore about how we can actually look at designing initiatives that can get integrated outcomes across that sort of three pillars of the sort of sustainability, the environment, the social, and the economic. So yeah, it's been great having the conversations with you and with Lee about how we might approach that. So yeah, I think it's a very good direction to head in.
Awesome. So now that you just had Guy and Lee talk about that, let's just reflect on that. So if you want to think about how the Office of Road Safety and the recent draft strategy and where we're sort of heading at the moment, they're really touching on looking at the social model. So what this means by definition, as I said, the aim of using a social model is to approach and build road safety into a business as usual approach to various touch points and mechanisms across the multiple sectors of society. So what that means is it's not just about us people who are passionate about road safety like myself, but it's actually getting all these other levers applying and incorporating into this business as usual sort of approach. And when we go in and you hear from Lee and you hear from Guy, you're going to hear how these elements are. And I'll touch on this through the National Road Safety Partnership Program in particular, around how so many of our case studies and learnings really draw these two in. And the other part, which a lot of people may not be aware of, which has been business for a long, long time, is the triple bottom line. And that's really creating a business case for a true system for organisations through safety, environment, and efficiency. So most really good, successful organisations will actually measure all those elements together. It's not one either or. It's safety, the environment, productivity leading to a sustainable future. So that's basically going to be the framework for what we're sort of talking about at the moment. So, Guy, I'd like to throw over to you, mate. What's your sort of thoughts around eco driving and eco safe driving, and are they, is it an either or situation?
Definitely not an either or situation, and I think maybe just to set a bit of the scene, that the way we're approaching emissions reduction is through four main pillars. We've got energy efficiency, switching to cleaner fuels, electrification of the economy, and then addressing the sort of the non-energy emissions and carbon storage side. But it's that first pillar which we're really talking about here, is the first pillar of energy efficiency has a real productivity benefit to it. So outputs, and therefore you do end up with that sort of productivity side. So that's been well known for quite a while. The bit that was missing, maybe for me in the early stages of that, was the social side. So how do we actually incorporate that in as well? So we know that transport emissions make up almost 18% of the national emissions inventory, and that percentage of emissions is going up. We're getting higher emissions, so we do really need to tackle that transport side. And tackling the transport side will involve two areas. One, in terms of energy efficiency, the first is the technical side, getting more efficient motors, getting better fuel standards, and tackling all of that sort of technical side. But there's also large emissions reductions can be made through the more adaptive approach, if you like, of behavioural change. So we need to look at what that means to get that efficiency up through just changing our behaviours. And that's in some ways, that's a harder challenge, because it's a values-based challenge and it's an adaptive challenge. But that's where I think eco driving really can fit in. Shall I give a bit of a snapshot of what we think eco driving is? Maybe that's time.
I think let's throw it in, and then I think after that it's great to hear from Lee. And so it's a bit of a challenge you've sort of pointed out, and I reckon that's a challenge that I think Lee's stepped up to as an organisation that can really draw into it, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, I can certainly pick up on the theme that Guy's talking about around sustainability. We like to approach most of our operations through a sustainability lens around the environmental sustainability, or certainly the social sustainability. That's what our community service organisation is all about, but particularly the environmental side of it as well. That's been a real focus for us as an organisation. We were the first Australian registered charity and first South Australian organisation to be certified carbon neutral back in 2015, and we purchased eligible carbon offsets to maintain that status. So we've had a focus. It's been a 10-year journey to this point in continually looking to reduce our carbon emissions from all of our operations. So we measure our carbon footprint in that. And yeah, just looking at transport, I mentioned company fleet at the top there, and also grey fleet. We also need to capture our employee commuting. So
what's grey fleet, Lee, by the way, just in case? It's not, is it yourself perhaps, or as an older driver, or is it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. It's certainly looking that way. There's not much, it's still a bit of grey in the beard, but yeah, it's just not a whole bunch of older people driving cars. So it's also known as grey as like an invisible fleet. So it's actually where people are using their own private vehicle for work purposes. So they may or may not be claiming a reimbursement. Doesn't matter if they're actually doing a business kilometre, a business centimetre travel in their own car, then that's grey fleet. That's the term that gets used. So yeah, we measure company fleet, the grey fleet, and employee commuting, which is people to and from work. We've actually got to capture that in our carbon footprint as part of our certification. So our transport emissions for those three categories together is almost half of our carbon emissions footprint. Electricity is obviously another big component, about a third of our emissions, but yeah, transport's certainly right up there for us.
Wow, and just on that, like, Guy, I think, what is what is eco driving, just out of interest? And do you think it's very different to the safe driving? And then we can hear around how Lee's linked the two together and how that's sort of tied into what a sustainable fleet is.
Yeah, I think once you look at what the behaviours in eco driving are, you'll be able to see the obvious links between that and safe driving. So things like the main elements to it would be things like anticipatory driving as smoothly as possible, trying to avoid lots of braking and lots of acceleration, and merging with the traffic and keeping that really smooth. Reducing excessive speed is an obvious one. Reducing excessive speed reduces your fuel usage. Planning ahead, so making sure that you're looking at the most efficient route up front rather than getting on the road and then trying to work through it. And I suppose technology can help there with things like the Google Maps. You can avoid those hot spots where you're going to slow down and all those sorts of things. So planning your routes is really important. Reducing unnecessary cargo, reducing the weight in the vehicle can help. Correct tyre pressures, and then elements such as reducing those elements that draw on the motor as well, like air conditioning can actually be a big element of eco driving as well, and reducing idling. And between those elements there, and they've modelled actually what the potential fuel and carbon savings are. Anticipatory driving can get you, say, 33%. Excessive speed can get you 23% savings. But what's been found with actual studies that have worked with companies that have done this is they get between about 5 and 10% normally savings in there. It's hard to get the perfect bit because it's a values thing and it's a behavioural thing. But you can get 5 to 10% fuel savings and CO2 savings just through those elements. And fuel and CO2 is not the only environmental impact from it. Between 10 and 25% of microplastics in oceans is being attributed to things like tyre and brake wear. So there's actually a big impact coming from that aspect of driving as well. And because you might look at the fuel use and you say things like, well, when we get electric cars, we don't have to do eco driving anymore because we've solved the CO2 emissions. But those other impacts of tyres and brakes and the environmental impacts will still be there. But I think that's a really good point then to say, well, then if the eco driving is getting you that, how does that link into that sort of safe driving aspect? And if you look at all of those elements of that I just listed, the smooth, the anticipatory driving, reducing excessive speed, trip planning, reducing cargo, correct tyre pressures, all of those contribute to safe driving. And I think that is the real key, is linking those two things together, because 5 to 10% fuel savings, Lee, I'm not quite sure how much that would work out in your organisation or other organisations. That is significant enough to build a bit of a business case around it. But if you add in the fact that things like the safe driving aspect, and up to a reduction of, I think it is about 35% in accidents, then all of a sudden you're getting savings also in that reduced accident cost and reduced insurance and all that sort of area. So once you start looking at that business case for eco driving, the addition of safe driving practices into that and the benefits from safe driving, all of a sudden your business case is really strong. So I think that for us, we're in the sustainability area, we have to look sometimes for those other linkages. And the more we've done that, the more we've found that the savings and the economic aspects of that environment one actually come in different aspects. So fuel, yep, that's good savings, but the major cost savings will be in something like safety. And we found that with thermal efficiency in housing can save you 5% on your energy bill, but the thermal efficiency for low-income households will save millions in the healthcare sector. So there are some good studies in there. We need to make sure that we link these things together and design initiatives across that, as you said before, the environment, the economic and the social side, Jerome.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So we got that. Now, how does it, Lee, does it make the case? From what we just heard from Guy then, is it good business sense?
It is, absolutely. It's not just a theory. I think we've got plenty of examples where when I talk about sustainability, social, environmental and financial, economic, quite often they are mutually beneficial. They're not mutually exclusive. So whether you're approaching something through an environmental lens or a social/safety lens, we generally find that, you know, if you, Guy mentioned the smooth driving, you know, you're anticipating, you know, a light change ahead. You're not going flat out and stop. So you're not speeding as much. You're giving yourself more braking time. You know, acceleration's not as harsh, and same with braking. So you've got less wear and tear on your car. So you're maintaining your car better. You're saving money because you're using less energy. You're still getting to your destination in a reasonable time and probably in the same time as someone else who's just going flat out and stop and is driving more erratically. So certainly around the behaviour change, we see that when we focus on trying to reduce our energy use and be more energy efficient, and approach things, I suppose, calmer and drive smoother, and even, you know, planning your trips, and particularly in today's day and age. I mean, we used to, not that long ago, just not think much of jumping on a plane and going to an interstate conference and spending 3 days there, or, you know, driving around and delivering our services. We've all had to get pretty creative in recent times in still being able to deliver services, but differently. And particularly us as a community service organisation, you know, we do a lot of counselling services. We've had to get very familiar with the online space very quickly, and we've sometimes found that we're more accessible. Some of our people are holding their appointments more because they haven't had to jump on public transport to get into a location to meet face-to-face with us. So it's another alternative, and we've actually seen some benefits, not to mention all the carbon emission reduction in the process, because you've just got less transportation happening. So we see there's benefit for the organisation, but also our clients and our customers that we serve. And it's around the behaviour change. We also see it with our strategic procurement as well. So, you know, 85% of our company fleet are light passenger fleet, and 96% of that light passenger fleet we run as petrol, hybrid, electric cars at the moment. So we've done the business case. We look at the whole of life costs of that product. Might cost a bit more up front, but the running costs are less, and we get to sell it, and the residuals are higher. So the whole of life costs are actually cheaper for us in running a more environmentally friendly vehicle. So it's ticking the financial sustainability, it's ticking the environmental, and we also make safety. We always put safety first. When we're looking at environment, we make sure that we're never compromising on safety. So we always run 5-star ANCAP rated vehicles as a minimum in our company vehicles.
Can you only, but is it because you're a not-for-profit or a charity? Is that why the eco safe driving works for you, or do you think, could any business do it? Absolutely, any business could, Jerome. I mean, every business should be conscious of every cent that they're spending, and I think they are, and probably even more so these days, because we have had to adapt to changing environments, whether it's COVID related or not. So people have had to really watch their pennies, and it just makes financial sense. Certainly for a not-for-profit, you know, we're always conscious, but it benefits any business. It's not, if we weren't a not-for-profit, I still think we should be making the same decisions, because it's saving us money. Every dollar we spend on our environmental focus, we are more than saving it in our operating costs and in relation to our reduced safety costs as well. And the point I was going to draw back on Guy and you made earlier when you were going through the eco and the safe driving, I would say the other one is, obviously we're focusing on the vehicle, but the actual driver, we were talking about earlier, the mental space of a driver. If they're driving in those conditions, they're driving courteous. I would argue that they're in a better state physically and productively as well, which means they're probably doing better at their job if they're more focused on each of their meetings and plan things out. What do you guys think about that sort of? Because less aggression on the road is a win-win for everyone. Yeah,
I would have thought so, Jerome, that the mental health of the people in the car, the less stress would be another significant area that can impact in as well. And yeah, I think the more we can identify those sort of benefits that will flow through, the better that will end up. Just thinking too, you know, a lot of companies have corporate social responsibility aims, and I must admit that a lot of that, they'll go and sponsor the local football club or do things like that. Nothing wrong with that, don't get me wrong, but if you're thinking corporate social responsibility, having your staff on the roads driving courteously and doing all that is actually a corporate social responsibility response as well. And we should acknowledge that area there is, you can run corporate social responsibility out of your operations arm, not out of your marketing arm, I think is something which would be really good to see. And Lee is saying that if you found that your operating environmentally actually has savings, I think it will also have a really good impact in the reputation area as well. If you're looking after your staff, they're less stressed. I mean, that's a social responsibility. I think that's really well reflected in that.
Yeah, that's a good point, Guy. Whether it's some staff attraction or retention, I know there's some key people who are really close to the carbon program and they're really passionate about it. They see it as a point of difference, and it just keeps them motivated at work, and they really get a lot of joy out of that program. We just had a big sustainability event in the last few weeks and announced our latest target to be net zero by 2035. So we're doubling down and continuing on that journey, and that's going to keep us busy for a little while, and we'll see if we can even do it before that date. But yeah,
how are you going to accomplish that? That's an incredible target.
Yeah, it is. And it is sort of around some of the science-based targets, and people quite rightly go, well, I've sort of got my head around what carbon neutral might mean. What's the difference between carbon neutral and net zero? And to keep it at a high level, I mean, carbon neutral, you can just go out and purchase offsets tomorrow for all your carbon footprint, and you can then say, I'm carbon neutral. We haven't done that. We've actually continually drive down our carbon emissions while purchasing offsets, because it almost acts like an internal price on carbon. We know whatever offsets we can't eliminate, we need to purchase offsets at the end of the financial year. So the pressure is always to drive those emissions down so we don't have to buy as much offsets. Net zero is just really taking it to another level and saying you really need to concentrate on eliminating your emissions. You can't just go out and buy any offsets to offset your footprint. If you can eliminate them, you should be eliminating them, your emissions, and only where it's not feasible, you can then purchase offsets. But those offsets then really need to be able to remove the carbon emissions that are already in the atmosphere. It's not enough that they're going to stop future emissions. To need to actually remove what's already in the atmosphere, because we've already got too much in there, which is causing a lot of our current problems that we're experiencing with extreme weather events and the warming of the planet across the longer term.
So how's your vehicle? Like you've got this, you have to deliver these services. So you have to have your staff moving out and about. How is that achievable? Like, do you have to, how old is your fleet? Do you have to keep turning it over? Are you going to go electric? And does that also mean, a lot of questions I'm throwing at you here, does that also mean like the safety is getting better and better as well? And how do you keep your staff engaged into understanding how to use it all?
Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts there, Jerome. You are right. I mean, the great thing is that the manufacturers are, every model that comes out has got more safety features in it, which is fantastic. The tougher part sometimes is educating your drivers in what all the safety features are. We're talking about autonomous emergency braking, and sometimes the first time alerts might come up on a dash to say brake, brake. If you don't, I'm going to. Can be a bit disconcerting for a driver if they're not familiar with some of those technologies. So it's continual education exercise around that. We certainly try and run as young fleet as we can. There's a number of reasons why we do that, but certainly safety is one, because you get a car that's getting much older than 4 or 5 years, it's starting to lag behind in safety standards. A 5-star ANCAP rated car today, or 5 years ago, wouldn't be 5 stars today. The benchmark keeps lifting. So that's one reason. Environmental efficiency is the other one. Even if you buy exactly the same model car, the next model is always coming out more environmentally efficient. So it's great for less carbon emissions, but also keeps the fuel costs down. I know that we save 1/3 on our fuel bill for our entire company fleet for every hybrid petrol electric compared to a full petrol vehicle. So that's significant for us. And the next thing for us to look at is how do we drive that footprint down further? So electric vehicles, we're hoping to be able to do a bit of a trial with some full electric vehicles soon. And we'll keep an eye on the whole of life costs. When that gets to a point when that's making financial sense for us to do that as well, we'll be looking to introduce more or introduce electric vehicles into our fleet. But yeah, we'll always have to deliver. We do in-home care services, so we will always have people going out providing services to people. But where we can, or we don't have to travel, or we can do a counselling session online or on the phone, and reduce travel, we'll do that. And sometimes we find our customers might prefer those new and different modes of transaction.
So how are you going, Guy, in Sustainability Victoria and linking these all together?
Linking, as an organisation, we're nowhere near the size of Lee's organisation, and if you're talking kilometre wise, we wouldn't be like a hundredth of what you're doing there. But I think from our point of view, our biggest area that we're trying to work through is, and Lee, that story you've just told there is great, about how you can actually use your fleet management and how you keep it updated and how it actually ticks those twin boxes of safety and environment. It's not a common story, and it needs to be one. Jerome, you were talking before about how do we normalise safety. We're trying to normalise that sort of environmental narrative across business as well. So we've been working with a lot of businesses over the last few years with the Take 2 program, pledging to reduce emissions. And the more we've worked with them, the more we can get it into operations, the better. But making this link now with safety is actually is a really significant step forward, I think, in the transport area. We've looked at energy, stationary energy for a lot longer. The biggest challenge now, as I mentioned before, with the transport emissions is getting that down. So we're really keen to work with businesses and organisations on how we can do that. And the best demonstration of it already comes from that industry. And Lee, that story is a perfect example of the directions that we should be pushing, I think. So our role really is to try and amplify that message and amplify that narrative, and to work with industry, with those leaders, which is where I'd position your leaders in that leaders area is definitely where we'd like to go and like to work more. The other thing it makes me think about too, though, is that disclosure side too, Lee. You talked about the science-based targets and how they're derived, and in some ways that's a really mature risk management process. And we know that through disclosures like the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure and other disclosure forms, it can really drive change at a fairly rapid pace. And TCFD, that Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, it's a big mouthful and it sounds pretty obvious, but is one of the biggest drivers I've seen for large businesses to actually change their practices. But essentially, it's a mature risk management framework. And I think if we can get that style of thinking in at executive and board level, and we can keep and we can make sure that you're disclosing what you're doing, and it's part of the responsibility of the executive and the boards to actually keep it updated and maintain that. The boards have got a duty to actually address risks as they come up, and disclosing them is part of that. And I think that's a really good framework. And Jerome, you and I have talked about disclosures for safety as well, and it's for road safety. And I just reckon that's a really good way to go and a really good way to think about how do we link all of this together as well. If we disclose safety, environment, as well as your financial side, yeah.
Actually, I totally agree on that. A recent submission into the National Road Safety, the new strategy, and into the parliamentary inquiry that went in, we actually made that sort of case and sort of said, look, if you really want to get things changing, the moment you begin getting people to report on them, departments and organisations, to say how is their safety tracking, and then you put a name next to it and say someone's accountable. So the moment you have that, change begins occurring quite quickly. And I think I'll be quite keen to know, what do you guys think? Is organisations more willing to talk about the environmental side and what they're doing rather than the safety side, because they're a bit worried about, is there going to be blowback if my safety performance is poor?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because from my perspective, sitting in the environment area, the environment stuff's been ignored for so long. Whereas I've always thought, oh, if you could just link it to occupational health and safety, surely that, they get such a big focus in organisations, and most organisations, I think, are pretty strong on that. I don't know why. Maybe there is there is mandatory reporting if something goes wrong, but not how do you avoid those risks? But for me, the TCFD process was completely new in the environment area, and I thought it was a really big step. But I already assumed it was in there for safety. Maybe not. No.
Yeah, no, it is interesting. So, I mean, I think the TCFD is still a bit voluntary at this stage, but they are looking at whether that should become mandatory. We're not following that at the moment, but what we do as part of our Climate Active certification, we have a public disclosure statement that we need to make every year, and that's available publicly on their website. So it does certainly give that external level of public accountability that we're making claims and we could just be reporting internally or to our board. But as part of that certification, they're saying, no, you need to report what you're doing, what your footprint looks like, is it reducing? And also, what are you planning to do to improve, to continue to reduce that in the future? It's not enough just to report what you've done, but also tell us what your plans are as well. But yeah, safety, it is interesting. Safety, I think, is pretty embedded for reporting internally, and those mandatory reportings, if you do unfortunately have an incident that you do need to report to your local authority, but not as much with the public disclosure, unless someone's, a company's choosing to do that, perhaps as part of their annual report. But there doesn't tend to be that real public accountability or declaration there. So it is interesting, Jerome. I think that is, so if it's voluntary at this stage, maybe are people shying away from that, not prepared to share what their record is? If there was something mandatory, well, then we'd all have a clear understanding of what people's safety records would look like, which would be interesting, which is way the environmental space is starting to move into. So I'd be surprised if we couldn't get safety moving similarly as well.
It should really be part of the one, sustainability disclosure,
Correct.
if you like. Yeah, what's your finance, what's your social safety, and what's your environmental side?
Yeah, which is that triple bottom line reporting, isn't it? I mean, we all publicly reported our finances forever. Debit and credits have been around for, centuries. But that triple bottom line reporting, if that became more of a mandatory thing, then we'd all have to report on all of those three elements.
Well, Lee, would it be easier for you to become carbon neutral or go down the path where you look, if you got rid of your fleet and went grey fleet, would that make your reporting easier? It might make your safety a bit more challenging.
Yeah, it certainly would. It certainly would. Probably not, because again, the reason it's called grey fleet is because it is a bit more invisible, and it's sometimes harder to get the visibility that you have typically with a company fleet. So, I mean, I know some organisations would have gone the opposite. They've just said, for a number of reasons, safety and perhaps environmental reasons as well, we're shying away from grey fleet and we're only running company fleet. So they've had to go out and buy a lot more company cars to deliver their service and not run grey fleet. Certainly the reporting that comes from a company fleet is always easier and is easier to manage because you've got a lot more control over the age of the vehicles. You can have policies around grey fleet, but by design, probably it is difficult, not impossible, but it is harder to probably, we're going to turn our cars over every 3 to 4 years, our company cars. Do we ask that of all of our employees to say, well, you can't have a car any older than 4 or 5 years? So that's why, if you want to go down that path for safety and or environmental or even financial reasons, potentially, some choose to say, let's just run company cars. But grey fleet's interesting. I think there's a lot more grey fleet out there than people realise. There are some that acknowledge it and know that it's there and try and track it. There's others that probably aren't aware. The scariest one is if you're not aware at all. You need to get aware pretty quickly. But yeah, it exists pretty prevalently across a lot of organisations. Even just going down to the post office to pick up you know, the secretary picking up the mail on the way. That's some
great
grey fleet
trip.
travel.
Yeah. And it sounds like your grey fleet is going green though.
Yeah, it's the harder one to get green. But what we do is we, with our hybrid petrol electric vehicles, so when they come to the end of the term for us and we're due to refresh our fleet, we offer them to staff. So we go and get auction houses to price them all up, but we make them available to staff first before we go to public auction. And we're doing that for a number of reasons. It has a bit of an employee benefit, but also to try and get them into a younger, safer and more environmentally friendly vehicle. So we've got a number of strategies we put in place to try and get people aware. And the program, our carbon reduction program, is pretty embedded. It's really what we do here now. It wasn't always, but it has been in recent years, which is fantastic because people start to, you know, infiltrate or take those behaviours into their home, into their personal life, and we'll start looking at their private car going, actually, maybe I don't need to be spending so much petrol on my V8. I might be able to get a more fuel efficient, safer, younger car and spend half as much petrol.
Example, staff retention too. Staff must love working there, Lee.
Yeah, we do have some that directly come to us, and even some of our customers. We run a retirement village, and I know some of our residents, we had a table of them at our recent sustainability event, which was a real focus on environmental, and that's why they're there, because they just have a passion for it. And some of them have chosen to come and stay in our retirement village here at U City in the CBD for that reason, because that's helped a bit of a differentiator and got them over the line because they aligned with what we're trying to do.
Absolutely fantastic discussion, guys. And one other thought I'd like to draw in for a second there, Lee, and then we'll look at sort of closing up in a tick and opening up for questions. The fit for purpose, I was just reflecting on this quite often. Like, if you sing there and you understand the purpose of a journey, you begin linking, I guess, the sustainability again, the safety and the eco component, the fit for purpose comes down to, because I know there's organisations, for example, a sales company that had Ford Rangers for their salespeople. They never needed them, and they were complaining about having bingles in car parks. So straight away, they got a massive footprint, they got a cost with that, but they're ticking just the safety one because it's 5-star ANCAP. But is it the safest, fit for purpose and environmentally friendly vehicle? I would say not.
Yeah, fit for purpose is really important. I mean, we almost start with fit for purpose. You need to have the right vehicle for the purpose that you're trying to deliver. And over the journey we used to just run, I think, the old station wagons right back in the day. Used to always think we always had to have a station wagon attached to almost all of our sites, just in case we needed to throw a whole lot of things in the back and take them off somewhere. And we challenged that, quite some years ago. And there were just perceptions, or just in case, we might need this just in case. So you should always be retesting and challenging that. And fit for purpose is number one. And then for us, it's safety and then environmental. And quite often we find we get a great product that ticks all three. But yeah, you shouldn't just be looking at one element, because then you can end up making some less than desirable choices.
So what a closing way to finish out. So Guy, would you just like to make one sort of closing comment, mate?
Yeah, I think the way forward for us in the sort of sustainability area is definitely on this integration idea of how do we design the way we operate and the initiatives that we're taking to actually tick off on all three, and not regard something as a co-benefit or an incidental benefit, but actually design things really tightly so that you get that sort of overall business case design ticking off on environmental, economic and social all at the same time. It's not a trade-off, as you mentioned before. Yeah.
Right. Thanks, Guy. Lee, closing comment?
Yeah, it's not that hard to run a sustainable fleet, and I absolutely agree with Guy. Just look at all three, and most of the time you'll find they complement one another.
Awesome. Thanks, mate. And look, if you go to the NRSP website, you'll see case studies by Simon National Carrier, Grasshopper Environmental, Church of Christ, Queensland, City of Sydney. There's just 4 quick examples off the top of my head where they've linked all these together. So The business case is there. Thank you very much. And we'll hopefully hear a few questions now as well. Thank you.